Most Reverend Emeritus Archbishop, on behalf of our chaplain, Father Dominic Kim Sơn Nguyễn, and our community assistant, Father Michael Phạm Quang Hồng, together with our editorial and the production team of our special video to mark our 40th anniversary of our community establishment here in WA. We would like to express our warmest greeting and thank you for giving us this opportunity to have a quick talk with you today.
Thank you.
Most Reverend Archbishop, in the late 70s and the early 80s, waves of Vietnamese refugees fled the country, risked their lives by boat or by foot to search to find the freedom. A great number of them were accepted to settle in WA here and housed in Greylands Hostel to learn English and to be equipped with the necessary and important information to start a new life in the new society of Australia. The Catholics went to Mass in a big number at St. Thomas Church in Claremont, which was a short distance away from Greylands Hostel, and where they would be able to celebrate the Masses and also celebrate the first Vietnamese martyrs back then. When the new arrivals were encouraged to move out to live in the large communities, they first chose to live in the proximities of North Perth and Highgate areas to get close to all amenities, especially the many charity organizations. During that time, you were a parish priest of Highgate and the director of Centre Care of Perth Diocese, the place many of us came to seek help. Could you please share your thought of the Vietnamese Catholics' situations in their early years when you first met them?
Yes, certainly. Love to do that. In fact, before I was parish priest of Highgate, I was Director of Catholic Immigration. And when I heard that refugees were coming from what was then Indochina, but really from Vietnam, some Cambodians, but mainly Vietnam, and were staying down at Claremont or the Greylands Hostel. They were big huts, I can remember them well. I believed I had a responsibility to go and meet them and find out how the local church, the Catholic Church in Perth, could help them. I remember very vividly going down there. I took an interpreter so I could speak to the people through him, and liaised with the parish priest of Claremont to allow masses to be said there and sacraments to be given, baptisms and so forth, so that their church life would continue. The people were mostly young, but there were some old ones there, but mostly young and very happy to have found a new country that would accept them. When I went to Highgate, then they were no longer in the camp. They were settling in many places. But before then, one of the things that I did that may not be remembered now, but I remember it well, was to visit one of the, or some of the transit islands where the Vietnamese had gone to from Vietnam, from the Mekong Delta, and maybe other places as well. And with the help of a French missionary in Malaysia, I went to the island of Pulau Bidong. And that had about 5,000 people on a tiny island. And they were working with the United Nations to see what country would accept them. And I was given a whole lot of letters from the Vietnamese community in Claremont and in Perth to take there. And when I arrived, I told the authorities that I had come from Australia, and they said, Caritas. And I said, yes, Caritas Australia. Caritas Australia didn't exist, but they knew of other Caritases. So I was Caritas Australia. They gave me a table, they gave me a chair and a loudspeaker, and they would read the addresses and call out the names, and people would come from all over to pick up their letters from Australia. It was just a wonderful experience that somehow or other, I wasn't a bishop, I was just an ordinary priest. I was able to bring joy to the people that their relatives had escaped, were on the island waiting to be accepted in Australia or some other good country. And I also went to that big centre in the north of Indonesia. What was it called? Galang. Galang. I also went to the huge Galang camp and found a priest or two there and persuaded one to come to Australia. So that's very much part of the beginnings, and a part that I'm very happy with, because it meant that from the very beginning they were not abandoned, they were embraced by the church. I was representing the Archbishop Foley and was able to be part of the local church, welcoming the people. And then for the long term, I stayed with the Vietnamese community in many, many ways. When I was parish priest of Highgate, too, there was a time when Mass was celebrated only a brief time in a hall in Bailey Street, I think.
Barley Street.
Barley Street, yes. So Archbishop Foley bought that, Barley Street premises, but eventually it was not like it wasn't a church. So they moved up the hill to Highgate Church, and we had the Vietnamese Mass there for a long, long, long time. And Father Francis Lee was coming on stream then, and he was the chaplain, and I was just sort of the grandfather. No, I am now the grandfather, but I was the sort of father figure that would encourage them. And we got Sister Patricia, to live where I was living, at the back of the parish house in a special room. And she died recently, God rest her. So I remember all those days, and all the time I was admiring the faith of the Vietnamese, the spirit of family, and the new freedom that they had from the communists and from oppression. And it gave them joy. And we can see the result now. They have expanded and settled and are now leaders in the Australian community. But those early days are very special to me, and I have wonderful memories of them.
Thank you so much, Archbishop, for sharing all your thoughts and your feelings. When you mentioned Pulau Bidong,
yes,
and when you mentioned you were the directors of the Center Care and also immigration,
yeah,
that did help me to recall so well back then. Because I came here on the 19th December 1982, and 5 days after that, some of our community members asked me to come to your church in Highgate to sing the Christmas carol in Vietnamese. That's the first
were you
chance.
in Pulau Bidong?
Exactly.
You're there.
That's the first chance I would be able to mix with the parish there, and to mix with Australian society here.
Well, that's wonderful.
That stay with me
You were a little boy then?
All the time.
Yeah.
And
Well,
and
I
then-
was Caritas Australia. It
And,
exists
yeah.
now, but it didn't exist then. But
And,
that was a good name to have, Caritas Australia.
And back then, they also took me, right, to see you as well. Now, I like to give a noun for another question.
Yes.
Thank you. I was not lucky. I was in Galang
Galang,
in 1980, but I was not lucky to see you then.
Yeah, it was about that time I went,
Yeah.
maybe before. Yeah.
Your
I got a
Excellency.
helicopter from Singapore over to Galang.
Yes, on the Cap Anamur.
Yes.
From there
Yeah.
to Singapore.
Yeah.
Yes. We were picked up by the helicopter to the Cap Anamur
Yes.
at the time.
And there was a brother, a religious brother there, Dutch. They had no water at Galang. They had to bring it in big trucks.
Exactly. Yeah. They import.
He got a stick and, you know, divining, they do that a lot in Australia, found the water underground. So there was water in Galang because of that brother. And I don't know if you have that tradition in Vietnam, but we do in Australia. Farmers out there in hot country, no water, they take a stick, a fork stick, and when they find the water under the ground, it pulls them down. So it's a magnetism.
Spring out.
Yeah, and they find the water.
See. It was in Highgate Parish that in 1981, as you already been aware of that we established our organization, and from then to now in our community we have many we call the popular devotion groups like the Divine Mercy, Legio Mariae, Cuxillo, and we also, beside that, we have spiritual and social groups like the marriage enrichment,
Oh yes.
yeah, and the Catholic women and Catholic old age or the age, yeah.
And the Vincent de Paul Society.
Yes.
One of the Vietnamese was a member of that at Highgate.
Yes. And then, as we already mentioned to Archbishop Costello, that due to employment, the churchgoers in some events like Christmas, Easter, the New Year or our Lunar New Year, a lot of them turn back here, and the number could reach 2,000. But in festivals like today, we have around 1,500. Yes. How do you think of the way the Vietnamese Catholics have shown the values of the church teaching, their beliefs, and their practice of faith in the life of the church?
I think you've probably answered that question yourself. You have stayed strong. You know one another. You support one another's faith, and that is not easy in Australia, because Australia is not a religious country. It's very secular, and they're getting more so, and it's very prosperous. So there are dangers to the faith. Freedom, license, money, good things of life. You don't need God anymore. No persecution.
But we do.
So the danger before was persecution, and you were strong. And I see today other dangers, and I see a lot of Australian families from Europe becoming secular, forgetting their faith. But the Vietnamese communities remain strong, and that's because the family is strong. So I think you are weathering the dangers of an affluent society, just as you weather the dangers of an oppressive society. We've got to look at both things. There are dangers here, dangers to faith, but because of the strength of the people, and of course on the number of priests of Vietnamese origin that are here in this diocese. You have weathered that storm and have held your faith despite all the pressures of the society to take them away.
When you're talking about the family focus, we totally agree with that. And as we had been already sharing with Archbishop Costello, the reason and the main factors to hold our community together, that's from the family focus. The belief, the faith starts from the family to the community. And please pray for us and for our future generation. We wish to maintain and to improve that belief all the time. And another question we would like to have with you is, what do you think about the Vietnamese Catholics in the early years and now?
Is there a big difference? Oh yes, they were poor when they came here. They were poor. Sometimes they brought gold with them, but of course they had to get rid of that because everywhere there's corruption and people want the gold and they take it away.
Exactly right.
Yes, they do that. They even on Pulau Bidong, you had to buy things, and the prices went right up because of the scarcity of goods. And I remember the French priest with me, he said, "Do not charge heavily, these people are poor. Suppress your prices so they can afford." So the people were poor. They came to Australia with next to nothing. And I see that, but I see the spirit of freedom and enterprise, that you've embraced the country, you have developed the country, you've got political power now, you've got professionals all through the community, and many have done well financially. What's the difference? The difference is economic, but the difference is also that at the same time you've taken your faith to this different community setting, and it's strong. You mentioned fathers. The father of a family, the mother is the heart of it, the father can often be the leader. So I think that too is there in the Vietnamese family, and that's still the same today, and that's one of the reasons why they're so successful. So I see economically, educationally, professionally, there have been great differences, but they came with that potential and they found they developed that potential.
Thank you so much, Archbishop, for your valuable sharings and thoughts. We can see that you have actually a very big heart, right? To embrace us all, the Vietnamese refugees and also Vietnamese Catholics. Every time you visit our centers, your smile and a caring attitude clearly always tell us how much you love us.
Could I say just something more? Because it's important. It's a little detail. I had, in the early days, a question. There were no Vietnamese priests, none. And how do the people go to confession? All right, God understands all sins, all languages, so they can go in Vietnamese, and I can absolve them in English. But personally, that's not enough. So I produced a little pamphlet. With the help of translators, I got about 20 sins in English, and they translated them into Vietnamese. And so when they'd go to confession, they couldn't speak to me, but they would, this one, this one, this one. And it worked. I gave them the blessing.
So wonderful.
And recently somebody, an old person, still had his in his pocket.
Right.
Yeah. English sins translated into Vietnamese sins.
So beautiful idea. And thank you, Archbishop.
It's not needed now, but that was right at the very beginning. And I laughed, but I thought, no, they're using it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And actually, right, you are also truly, to me, and I believe it, to our community as well, you are truly a pioneer of our community, and always showing us how a good shepherd you were and you are. You're always ready to protect us from anything that might harm us since the early years until now, especially in regard to the life of faith. On behalf of our community, we would like to thank you so much for your time today and for your all sharing thoughts.
Thank you for your very kind words. I'm grateful that I've been given this opportunity by God to show care for people who are refugees to start with. So thank you very much for your kind words, and I only thank God that I was there at the time and that God used me to do some good.
Thank you, Archbishop, and God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Christ.
Để con nhận ra tiếng Ngài, tìm nơi đâu nơi con tim u mờ, bàn chân con cô đơn giữa dòng đời, xin cho con được nhận ra Chúa trên con đường lập lờ gió ngàn trôi. Chúa ơi, nơi tim con khao khát chờ mong. Chúa ơi, cuộc đời con xin trao về Ngài, ngày khi vui hay khi thất bại, giữa dòng đời đầy bon chen xin cho con nhận ra tiếng Chúa.